I used to believe graduation night would finally be the moment my family looked at me and actually saw me, not as the quiet child, not as the backup plan, not as the convenient daughter who never asked for anything. I thought maybe, after all the years of studying alone, working part-time jobs, and pushing myself through a degree they barely acknowledged, something would shift. Maybe they would clap, maybe they would smile, maybe they would call me theirs with pride. Instead, that night became the moment I learned what my family truly thought of me, and the night they made the biggest mistake of their lives. If you think you know what betrayal looks like, wait until you hear what happened when my father tried to force me to give up an $18 million inheritance I did not even know I had. I walked into the restaurant with a small hope tucked somewhere under my ribs. Soft lighting glowed across the polished tables. Servers moved quietly between families celebrating milestones. And for a second I let myself imagine I belonged to a family like that. One that cheered, one that noticed, one that cared. My mother, Marla, waved me over with the same tight smile she used whenever she wanted people to believe we were close. My father, Richard, barely looked up from his phone, and my younger brother, Ethan, was already leaning back in his chair, like he had paid for the entire evening himself. He did not even say congratulations. He just smirked at me as if he knew something I did not. I should have known then. We ordered food. People from nearby tables raised glasses, celebrating their kids with loud laughter. At ours, the silence sat heavy. My mother asked about my job offer, but only in the polite way people ask questions they do not intend to listen to. My father asked nothing at all. Ethan talked about his big plans for the future, describing studios he wanted to rent, trips he wanted to take, and equipment he planned to buy. He spoke like someone who already had money in his hands. A strange tension settled low in my stomach, like the room was preparing me for impact. But I kept telling myself to hold on. Just get through dinner, just get through tonight. I did not know that this dinner was not a celebration at all. It was an ambush. When dessert arrived, my father finally set his phone down. The clink of it hitting the table was sharp enough to make me jump. Then he reached into his leather bag and pulled out a thick brown folder. He slid it across the table toward me with a slow and deliberate movement. My mother folded her hands. Ethan straightened his posture like cameras were about to flash. "Avery," he said, "this is important." My throat tightened. Something in his tone felt rehearsed, heavy, final. I opened the folder just enough to see the first few pages. Legal documents, financial accounts, notarized signatures, property listings, numbers I did not understand at first. Then I saw a total printed near the bottom, and my heartbeat stumbled. $18 million. Before I could fully breathe, my father started speaking again. "Your grandmother trusted you with too much responsibility. But Ethan is the one who needs the estate. He is the future of this family. You already have a job. You can support yourself. It is time to put your brother first. Sign the transfer, the transfer." The word hung between us like a blade. I looked at my mother. She nodded. I looked at Ethan. He smiled like the estate was already his, like I had only been holding it for him, like I had no right to even hesitate. The room tilted. Suddenly the soft golden lights felt harsh and cold. I had not known my grandmother left anything. She died 2 years ago, and my parents handled everything in private. I assumed they kept me out of the process because they always kept me out of things. But now I understood something far more painful. They planned to take everything she left me and funnel it directly into Ethan's hands. I set the folder down. My palms were damp. My voice felt distant when I said it. "No." Ethan blinked, stunned. My mother stiffened. My father leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Avery, do not be difficult." I said it again. "No." It was the first true boundary I had ever drawn with them, and I felt it land like a shock wave. Ethan scoffed. "Come on. You never even cared about Grandma. She left that money because she trusted me. Everyone knows that." Something in me cracked open at that. Not broken, awake. I pushed the folder gently back across the table. "I am not signing anything." My father stood so suddenly his chair screeched across the floor. Every head in the restaurant turned. He reached into the folder, grabbed my diploma, the one thing I worked 4 years for, and pulled a lighter from his pocket. "You do not deserve Helen's money," he said quietly. Then, he lit the corner of my diploma on fire. A gasp rose from the tables around us as the page curled into black ash. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg, because in that moment, watching the paper burn, I realized something they had never understood. You cannot intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose, and you cannot break someone who was never allowed to be whole. I stood. I smoothed my dress, and I walked away from the table and from them. But what they did not know, what they could not even imagine, was this: Grandma Helen had already prepared for this moment, and next week, at the lawyer's office, they would finally learn the truth they spent their whole lives avoiding, the truth that would cost them everything. When I stepped out of the restaurant that night, the cool air hit me harder than I expected, not because of the temperature, but because the world outside felt startlingly calm while everything inside me had shifted. My diploma was gone. My family's facade was gone, and the girl who spent years trying not to upset anyone had vanished with them. But if you want to understand why I did not cry while my father set fire to the one thing I worked for, you have to understand the years that came before, the years when I learned to make myself small just to survive under my own roof. I grew up in a house where silence was not just encouraged, it was required. Not because we were serene or peaceful, but because silence made room for Ethan. My parents used to say he needed space to express himself, but what they meant was that every room, every moment, every breath belonged to him. I remember the first time I understood my place in the Collins family. I was 8. Ethan had broken one of my grandmother's old vases, a delicate blue ceramic she brought from her hometown. I told the truth when my mother asked what happened. Ethan burst into tears, and suddenly I was the problem. Marla knelt, smoothing Ethan's hair, whispering that I needed to be kinder, that I should stop trying to make your brother look bad. I learned very fast that telling the truth could get me punished, so I learned how to stay quiet instead. As I grew older, the pattern only sharpened. At school events, Ethan's name was always shouted loudly, even when he only participated. Whenever I won awards, the room seemed to tilt, my parents giving polite nods as if my accomplishments were inconveniences. They never said they were proud of me, but they always said Ethan had potential. Potential. That was the word they used, like a shield, a justification, a prayer. It did not matter what I achieved. It mattered what Ethan might achieve someday. My grandmother Helen was the only person who ever challenged that narrative. She was a small woman with sharp eyes that could read you like a contract. When everyone else overlooked me, she looked closer. She sat with me during summers, showing me how to solder circuits, how to check account statements, how to question anything that did not sit right. I did not understand why she taught me those things then. Now I do. She knew. She saw what my parents were shaping Ethan into, and what they were trying to shape me out of. When I was 15, I was accepted into a competitive STEM program. I stood at the window on the morning of departure, waiting for my father to say something. Anything. Instead, he dropped Ethan off at a tennis clinic and told me to find my own ride. I dragged my suitcase to the bus stop and rode 3 hours alone. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself independence was good. But the truth is, even independence hurts when it is not a choice. At 16, Ethan crashed my mother's car into a mailbox. He blamed me. My parents believed him. I spent the weekend grounded while he went to a lake party. That was the first night I realized something important. In my family, innocence did not matter. Only convenience did. Years later, when I got accepted into my university program, the same one I just graduated from, I sat alone in a dorm room and bought myself a cupcake because no one called to say congratulations. Meanwhile, my family threw Ethan a party for passing summer classes he barely attended. People ask why I stayed quiet so long. Because for years, silence was the only thing that kept the peace. Because I believed if I just stayed small enough, compliant enough, invisible enough, my parents might one day see me. But life does not give out awards for endurance. My silence never protected me. It only protected their comfort. So when I sat in that restaurant a week ago, watching my diploma turn to ash, the strangest thing happened. My silence did not rise to my lips the way it used to. I did not shrink. I did not apologize. I finally stepped into myself. And maybe that is why my father looked confused when I stood up. He expected the girl he raised, the one who bowed her head and whispered, "I am sorry," even when she had done nothing wrong. But that girl was gone. When I left the restaurant, I walked all the way down the block before I realized I was not breathing in shallow gasps. I was steady, calm, almost relieved. I had lost the illusion of family, but I had gained something else: clarity. I understood something that night. Something Grandma Helen had tried to teach me for years, without saying it aloud. You cannot be erased if you no longer let people hold the pen. That is why, the next morning, when Ethan sent me a photo of my childhood room with the caption, "Thanks for the space, it is mine now," I did not react. And when my mother called asking me to stop being dramatic, I did not fold. When my father emailed, insisting I reconsider signing over the estate, I did not even reply, because a new truth had taken root inside me, a truth I could feel strengthening with every hour that passed. My family thought the only weapon I had was silence, but they forgot something. Silence can turn into strategy, and strategy can turn into power, and power can turn into the one thing they fear most: a reckoning. And that reckoning was waiting for all of us inside the lawyer's office. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment it happens, but that is not true. The hardest part is realizing the betrayal was simply the final chapter of a story that started years earlier, when you were too young to understand you were being written out of your own family. Walking away from that graduation dinner, the memory of my burning diploma still clinging to the back of my eyes, I kept coming back to one thought: why did Grandma Helen trust me with anything? Why me, the girl my parents barely noticed? Why me, the daughter they treated like a placeholder? The answer never lived inside that house. It lived with her. I was 10 the first time I understood my grandmother was different from the rest of the Collins family. She invited me to her workshop behind her old craftsman-style home. While my mother always insisted I stay quiet and clean, Helen insisted I get dirty. She placed a small circuit board in my hands and said, "Try, break it if you must. You learn more from what snaps than from what works." No one had ever encouraged me to be curious before. No one had ever given me permission to fail. For 2 hours, she sat beside me, letting me solder crooked lines and press buttons I did not understand. She never corrected me with impatience. She just watched, smiling in that quiet way of hers, as if she already saw the person I would become long before I could imagine it. On the drive home that day, my mother complained the whole time about how I smelled like burnt metal and grease. But all I could think was, I want to go back. I did. Again and again. By the time I was 12, Helen was teaching me things no other kid my age knew: how to read blueprints, how to calculate basic electrical loads, how to tell whether someone is giving you their real meaning or a distraction. She never spoke poorly of my parents, not once. She did not have to. She saw the way they dismissed me. She saw the way they glorified Ethan. She saw how I trained myself to stay quiet, sit straight, and not take up too much space because the slightest disruption from me was treated as a flaw, while disasters from him were treated as accidents. Helen once paused in the middle of teaching me how to strip a wire and said, "Avery, there is a kind of strength that grows in the shadows. Pay attention to it. One day, the people who underestimated you will wish they had not." At 12, I had no idea what she meant. At 23, standing under streetlights after walking out of my own graduation dinner without a diploma, I finally understood. But that message did not come all at once. It arrived slowly over the years, as she gave me pieces of a world she seemed to be building for me in secret. When I was 14, she gave me a small notebook and told me it was a logbook, a place to track patterns, numbers, projects, and people. I filled every page. I wrote about the way my father forgot my award ceremonies. I wrote about every time my mother praised Ethan for something I had done instead. I wrote about how invisible I felt in my own home. She read my entries silently, never criticizing, never pitying me. She just nodded, as if she already knew all of it. The strangest part was how often she asked me one question: "Do you trust your instincts?" I never knew how to answer, because no one had ever asked before. But she did, over and over, until the answer finally came to me. Yes, I trusted myself, even when no one else did. When I was 17 and got my statewide scholarship, Helen was the only person who showed up. She stood at the back of the auditorium in a gray coat, hands folded, smiling proudly, as if she had been waiting for that moment my entire life. After the ceremony, she cupped my face gently and said, "I hope you remember this feeling, Avery. You earned this, and one day, you will earn something far bigger." I did not know she meant $18 million. I did not even know she had that kind of wealth. She lived simply, modestly by choice, I now realize. What I do know is this. She spent years preparing me for something my parents pretended I had no right to. The night she passed, I sat beside her bed holding her hand. She squeezed my fingers once, lightly, and whispered, "You see more than they think. Hold on to that, hold on to yourself." I thought she was talking about my future. And she was, just not the part I expected. After her funeral, my parents handled everything with suspicious speed. They never mentioned a will, never mentioned an estate, never mentioned that she had chosen me for anything, but Helen had left me one final message. A quiet one, a patient one. A message that would not speak until the exact moment it needed to. And the more I replayed everything she taught me, the clearer it became. My parents underestimated me, but Helen never did. She was the only person who ever saw the strength I kept hidden, the strength she helped build, the strength they thought they could snuff out by burning my diploma. They were wrong, because that flame did not end my story. It lit the beginning of the one they feared most. And in a few days, when the lawyer finally opened the sealed envelope she left behind, my family would learn exactly what Helen had been preparing me for all these years. They thought I was the quiet one. They were not ready for who I was about to become. That is the hook they never saw coming. We've poured a lot of time and heart into creating this story. If you don't like it, give it a like anyway, and if you do enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get back to the story. If Helen taught me how to see clearly, my parents taught me something too, just not in the way they intended. They taught me what erasure feels like. They taught me how cruelty can hide in politeness, how dismissal can sound like praise, how a family can smile at you while quietly sanding down every part of who you are, until you barely recognize your own outline. After she passed, the house felt colder, not physically, but in the way people can drain warmth from a room without saying a word. My parents mourned her publicly, sending long messages to relatives, organizing flowers, posting tributes, but behind closed doors, the shift was immediate. They no longer had to pretend. Helen was gone, and so was the thin layer of accountability she forced them to maintain. That was when the erasure began in earnest. It happened so quietly at first that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Photos of me with Helen disappeared from the hallway. Not replaced, not moved, just gone. The framed one of us soldering a small lamp together vanished from the living room shelf. The one she kept on the mantel, a picture of me at 10, holding a circuit board with a crooked smile, mysteriously fell and shattered while I was at school. Ethan said it was an accident. My mother said it was old anyway. No one apologized. No one asked if I wanted to keep the pieces. They swept them into a trash bag and told me to focus on the things that mattered. But apparently, I was never one of those things. When school projects required parent involvement, I worked alone. When award ceremonies came up, my parents insisted they were busy, or said the events were too far, or claimed they did not get the email, even when I showed them the confirmation in my inbox. My father once told me, "You are independent. That should be enough. Ethan needs our attention more." It was not the absence that hurt most. It was how natural it was for them. When Ethan made a mess, everyone stopped to clean it. When I succeeded, no one stopped anything at all. I remember one particular night, not long after Helen passed. I was 16 and had spent months preparing a robotics presentation. My teacher had called my parents personally to tell them I was competing against seniors and college students. It was the biggest opportunity of my life up to that point. They did not come. Not even a text. I stood backstage with my project in my arms, watching other families cheer for their kids, feeling myself shrink inch by inch until my body felt too small to fit my own heartbeat. Then I felt something warm in my pocket. It was the small logbook Helen had given me. I ran my fingers along the edges and remembered her voice. Pay attention to the strength that grows in the shadows. That night, I won 3rd place against competitors 5 years older than me. When I got home, Ethan was in the kitchen bragging about a C he had bumped up to a B-. My parents were ecstatic. They hugged him, praised him, promised him a new tablet for all his hard work. When I told them about my competition, they barely paused. "That is nice," my mother said, "but be supportive of your brother. He actually needs encouragement." I replayed that moment more times than I can count. Not because I wanted their praise, because it cemented a truth I had spent years trying not to see. They did not just undervalue me, they made me invisible on purpose. Looking back, it makes perfect sense that they assumed I would hand over the $18 million estate without question. People who erase you never expect resistance. They expect obedience. They expect silence. They expect the version of you they crafted, not the one you became on your own. What they forgot, what Helen never did, is that I was not growing weaker all those years. I was growing sharper. I was learning to stand alone. I was learning to analyze the patterns, the motivations, the inconsistencies. I was learning them better than they ever learned me. And maybe that is why the night of my graduation dinner did not break me, because long before my father lifted that lighter, before the flame hit the edge of my diploma, before the room gasped, the truth had already settled inside me. I did not lose a family that night. I simply acknowledged the one I never had. After walking out, I replayed all these moments on my Aunt Meredith's couch, not to feel pity for myself, but to understand the full picture, because Helen taught me something vital, something I had ignored too long. People reveal themselves slowly, but they reveal themselves completely. Every forgotten ceremony, every dismissed achievement, every comment that made me smaller, every smile that did not reach their eyes, they all pointed to the same truth. The Collins family was never built to hold me, and that is why, when the lawyer finally contacted us, I did not feel fear. I felt something else. Something unfamiliar but steady, anticipation. Because the same family that spent years erasing me was about to learn what happens when someone you overlooked your entire life finally steps into the light you tried to hide from them, and they were not ready for what that light would reveal. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, tell me in the comments. You are not alone. By the time dessert was served at my graduation dinner, I already felt the old familiar weight settling in my chest, the weight of being unseen, unheard, unclaimed. Years of erasure do not disappear just because the world hands you a diploma. They linger like dust in the corners of rooms you are still forced to sit in. But even with all the warning signs, I was not prepared for how coordinated the ambush would be. Looking back, every moment of that night feels rehearsed, as if my family had practiced their lines in the mirror long before I arrived. The panna cotta had just been set down when my father finally straightened in his chair. It was the kind of posture shift he only made during business negotiations, the kind where he expected full control long before the discussion began. My mother placed her napkin neatly on her lap, her fingers too stiff, too deliberate. Ethan leaned forward with a smugness I had seen my whole life, the kind that comes from knowing he will never face consequences. Then my father pulled out the brown folder. Even before he spoke, my stomach tightened. Something inside me recognized the moment for what it was. A turning point disguised as a request, a demand dressed up as a family conversation. "Avery," he said, sliding the folder toward me, "this is important." The tone was flat, emotionless, rehearsed. I opened it and felt the air shift around me. Page after page of legal documents, notarized transfers, financial accounts listing assets I never knew existed, property deeds, stock portfolios, trust accounts, and then the line that snapped my world clean in half. Estate total, $18 million. I stared at it so long, the numbers blurred. I could not hear the clinking silverware or the faint music drifting from the speakers. All I could hear was a single question echoing in my mind. Why did no one tell me? But I already knew the answer. Because the person who left it to me, the only person who ever saw me, was gone, and the people who should have protected her wishes had no intention of doing so. My father cleared his throat. "Avery, your grandmother trusted you, but she did not think about the future of this family. Ethan needs this estate to set himself on the right path. You already have a job. You will be fine." Fine. The word hit harder than the number 18 million. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression softening into the mask she used whenever she wanted to appear reasonable. "Sweetheart, Ethan has big opportunities. This would give him a foundation, a head start. A head start. As if he had not been given a head start his entire life, while I stood quietly at the sidelines. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "It makes sense, Avery. You don't even want all this responsibility. And honestly, Grandma always said the family legacy belonged with me." That was the moment I felt something inside me go still, because he believed it. Every word, every lie, every ounce of entitlement. He believed he deserved all of it simply because he existed. I placed my hand on the folder and closed it gently. The room felt small, like the walls were leaning in to hear my response. "No," I said. They froze. My mother blinked. My father frowned, as if I had mispronounced a word he taught me. Ethan laughed. One short disbelieving breath. Dad leaned forward, voice tightening. "Avery, do not be difficult. Sign the transfer." "No." The second time felt more powerful. It echoed inside me like a truth I had been holding for years, waiting for the exact moment it needed to surface. My father's jaw clenched. He looked genuinely confused, then irritated, then something colder began to rise behind his eyes. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by me. "You do not understand what is at stake," he said. "Yes, I do," I replied. For the first time in my life, I understood perfectly. My mother opened her mouth, but I raised a hand not to silence her, but to stop myself from folding the way I always had. No explanations, no apologies, no shrinking. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice sharpening. "Why are you making this hard? You know I am the one who deserves it." Deserves. That word again. Something inside me snapped cleanly, not with pain but with clarity. The kind of clarity Helen had been preparing me for, since I was 10 years old. I repeated it one last time. "I am not signing anything." And that was the moment everything spiraled. My father stood abruptly, grabbing my diploma from the table and lifting his lighter with a steady hand. It happened so fast, no one had time to intervene. Flames caught the corner of the page and climbed upward. Gasps filled the restaurant. But I did not react. I watched the fire consume the paper and fall to ash. He expected fear. He expected tears. He expected the quiet girl he raised. But that girl had died long before the fire touched the page. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress. "Are you done?" He said nothing. My mother looked away. Ethan stared at the ashes like they were supposed to break me. They did not. Because what they did not know, what they could not even imagine, was that Grandma Helen had already locked her real intentions away in the one place none of them could tamper with, her will. And the moment the attorney opened it, everything they thought they controlled would fall apart. If you want to hear how that moment unfolded, like this video, so the next part reaches you, the truth only gets heavier from here. When my father burned my diploma, the room gasped as if something monstrous had happened. And maybe it had, but not in the way they thought. The fire did not destroy me. It revealed me. And the strangest part was that as I watched the edges curl into black ash, I felt something I had never felt in that family before. Freedom. My father waited for a reaction, anger, fear, desperation, anything that proved he still had control. My mother waited for me to crumble so she could sigh and say I was being dramatic. Ethan waited for me to apologize for upsetting him, the way I had been trained to do since childhood, but nothing came. I stood there, steady, breathing evenly. It startled them, maybe even scared them, because for the first time in my life, they had no idea what I would do next. And the truth was, neither did I. I only knew one thing. I was done playing the role they wrote for me. As I turned toward the exit, the restaurant around us hummed with whispers. Some people looked horrified, others curious, and a few stared at my father as though they were finally seeing the kind of man he truly was. But my parents didn't notice any of it. They were too focused on me, on the version of me they expected to shatter. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and honest. The contrast between the suffocating heat inside and the quiet darkness outside was so sharp, it felt like stepping into another world. My heels clicked on the pavement, each step echoing with something new, resolve. But resolve does not erase memory, and as I walked, the past tugged at me. Because this wasn't the first time my parents tried to break me. It was simply the first time they failed. I remembered every small moment that led here. The birthday party when I turned 10 and they forgot to pick me up from school because Ethan wanted ice cream. The Christmas morning they bought him a drone and handed me a notebook recycled from the previous year's return pile. The night I won a robotics award and my mother said, "Please don't overshadow your brother. He's sensitive." All those years of making myself small, so they did not feel smaller. All those years of silence, all those years of erasing myself so they would not erase me first. Maybe that was why the fire didn't gut me. I had already survived worse. Slow, quiet neglect burned slower but deeper. When I reached the corner, a streetlight flickered overhead, warm and pale. I stopped for a second and looked at my reflection in a darkened window. I expected to see the girl I used to be, timid, apologetic, scared to cause trouble, but she was gone. What stared back at me was someone my family had never bothered to know. Someone who had been growing quietly, day by day, under their radar. Someone my grandmother had seen long before anyone else. Someone they could no longer control. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing with dozens of missed messages, most from Ethan. "Where did you go? We need to talk. Dad is furious. You ruined dinner. Just sign the papers. It's not that deep. Seriously, Avery, don't be selfish." Selfish. It was almost funny. These were the same people who wanted me to hand over $18 million because it was best for the family. The same people who destroyed my diploma because they could not destroy my backbone. Their messages didn't hurt me the way they used to. They only confirmed what I already knew. My family did not want me. They wanted access to what I could give them. And they thought burning my diploma would scare me into surrender. Instead, it clarified everything. The girl they could intimidate was gone. The woman standing in her place had nothing left to lose. I did not respond to a single message. Instead, I walked until I reached the bus stop, sat down, and let the night settle around me. My body shook not from fear, but from realization. They expected me to break. They expected me to fold. They expected the version of me they built. But the truth was far more dangerous, at least to them. I had finally stopped caring about their approval. Because strength does not always come from standing tall. Sometimes, it comes from walking away. And as I waited for the bus, a new thought formed, cold and clear and certain. If they could burn my diploma without blinking, what else were they willing to do when the truth about the inheritance came out? That was when the fear finally hit, not for me, but for them. Because they still believed the estate belonged to Ethan. They still believed I would sign the transfer. They still believed I had no power. They had no idea what was coming. Grandma Helen had left more than money behind. She left answers, instructions, and a truth that would snap everything my parents thought they controlled. And the next time we sat in a room together, it wouldn't be around a warm dinner table. It would be across from a lawyer. If you were in my place, would you have walked away or confronted them on the spot? Comment below, and let's talk about it. The night of the graduation dinner, I expected the panic to come as soon as I walked away. It always had before. Every time I pushed back, even in small ways, guilt would wrap itself around my ribs like a tightening rope. I would question myself. I would shrink. I would rehearse apologies I never should have had to say. But that night was different. As I sat on the bus heading across the city, watching streetlights blur through the rain-speckled window, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet my parents forced on me. Not the suffocating quiet of erasure. This was a steady quiet, a rooted quiet, a quiet that felt like truth. Aunt Meredith opened the door before I even knocked. She must have sensed something was wrong because she didn't ask questions. She didn't demand an explanation or offer unsolicited opinions. She just stepped aside, let me in, and said, "I made tea. It's still warm." And for the first time in hours, I felt my body unclench. Her living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp and the soft gold wash from the kitchen. I sat on her couch and let the steam from the mug warm my hands. We didn't speak for several minutes. She didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence, didn't treat me like a problem to solve. It reminded me of Helen. Maybe that's why the tears came not from sadness, but from the relief of not having to hold myself together. When I finally told her what happened, she didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask why they did it. She just sighed, leaned back, and said something so simple yet so devastating. They were always going to try to take what wasn't theirs. You just finally stopped letting them. No judgment, no shock, just truth. And suddenly, the weight of the entire night, my father burning my diploma, my mother siding with him, Ethan's entitlement, felt like pieces of a puzzle coming together, forming the picture I hadn't let myself see. I had been trying to earn a place in a family that never intended to give me one. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Meredith's curtains. I woke up expecting a knot in my stomach, some residue of last night's chaos lingering on my skin. But instead, I felt something still and resolute inside me. I checked my phone. That was the mistake. Messages from Ethan. Messages from my mother. A 3-paragraph email from my father. The tone varied: accusatory, guilt-laced, dismissive, demanding, but the message was the same. come back, sign the papers, make this easy. Ethan wrote things like, "You're being selfish, and I already made plans with that money." And the one that made my jaw tighten, "Grandma always liked me more anyway." My mother tried emotional manipulation. "Your father didn't mean it. Families fight. Don't make this bigger than it is." And my father's email was the longest. Buried beneath insults and passive-aggressive disappointments was a single line that revealed everything. "Fix this, before we have no choice but to take action." Take action. Against me. Against the granddaughter Helen trusted. Against the person whose name was on the estate documents they had no right to touch. I read the line again and again, my heartbeat shifting from shock to clarity. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about unity. This was about control. Control they were losing. Control they thought burning my diploma would restore. Control they feared would slip completely once the truth came to light. I powered off my phone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to explain myself. That entire week, I stayed with Meredith. Days passed slowly, quietly. I cooked with her, helped her reorganize her bookshelves, watered her plants, went for walks in the neighborhood. There were no raised voices, no tension, no manipulation. She did not treat me like an inconvenience. And with each day that passed, something inside me healed in small but permanent ways. One night, while we folded laundry together, she said softly, "Your grandmother wasn't blind, Avery. She knew who you were becoming. She knew who they were, too." I swallowed hard. Did she know it would get this bad? Meredith paused, choosing her words with care. "She knew they'd try to take what she gave you. What she didn't know was whether you would be ready to stand your ground." Was I ready? I didn't know, but I was learning to be. The world outside kept moving, yet inside that small apartment, I was assembling a version of myself that no one in the Collins house had ever bothered to know. A version with boundaries. A version with self-worth. A version Helen would have recognized. On the 6th day, an email arrived in my inbox. Short, formal, from the law office. "The reading of Helen's will is scheduled for Monday. Attendance required. All parties have been notified." I stared at the screen, pulse steady, breath slow. This was it. The moment my parents thought they controlled. The moment Ethan thought he had already won. The moment Helen had been preparing me for since the day she handed me that first circuit board. I closed the laptop gently. They thought burning my diploma was the peak of what they could take from me. They had no idea that the real fire was waiting for them inside that lawyer's office. And when it ignited, none of them would be able to walk away unscathed. If you were in my place, would you show up confident or terrified? Tell me what you think. Your take might surprise someone reading. Thank you for staying with us this far. If you're busy or need to step away right now, hit subscribe or hit like so you can easily find this video again later. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning of the will reading felt nothing like the morning of my graduation. Graduation had felt heavy, suffocating, as if the world had been waiting for me to fail. This morning felt different, quiet, intentional, almost steady. I dressed slowly, deliberately, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but because stepping into that lawyer's office meant stepping into a truth I had avoided for too long. Meredith watched me from the kitchen doorway as I tied my hair back. "You don't have to go alone," she said gently. I shook my head. "I think I need to." She studied me for a moment, then smiled in that soft, understanding way she had inherited from her sister, my grandmother. "Avery, remember your grandmother didn't leave you unprepared. Not for this, not for them." I nodded, taking the sentence with me like armor. The law office was in an older building downtown, polished floors, quiet hallways, the faint smell of cedar woven into the walls. The receptionist led me to a conference room with tall windows, and when I stepped inside, I froze not from fear, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of the moment. I was early. For years, I had been the one rushing, trying to catch up to a family that never slowed down for me. Now I was the one waiting. Mr. Dalton, Helen's attorney, entered moments later. He offered me a respectful nod, not pitying, not dismissive, just respectful. "Avery," he said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for reaching out," I replied, though my voice felt distant, floating somewhere above the reality unfolding. He gestured to the seat beside him. "Your family should be here soon." Should be. The words made me exhale slowly, bracing myself. And then I heard them, the familiar cadence of my parents' voices in the hallway, tense and irritated. The door opened sharply. Richard entered first, jaw tight, eyes filled with the kind of restrained fury that only appears when control begins slipping. My mother walked in behind him, her face pinched with embarrassment, as if I had dragged her into this situation. And then came Ethan, late as usual, scrolling on his phone without the slightest awareness of reality. He looked up, saw me, and scoffed. "You actually came," he said, sliding into a chair as if this were a brunch meeting he had been inconvenienced by. I didn't respond. His words no longer had a place to land. My father took the seat directly across from me, placing both hands flat on the table. "Avery," he said, "we can still resolve this privately. There's no need for lawyers." Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "Actually, there is." The room stilled. My parents exchanged confused glances, but the attorney continued without hesitation. "As stated in the last will and testament of Helen Margaret Collins," he began, opening a folder. "Today's meeting is to clarify the distribution of her estate." Ethan leaned forward eagerly, and the sight almost broke something inside me, not sadness, not fear, but a strange kind of grief for who he could have been, if entitlement hadn't raised him. Mr. Dalton read through pages, dates, formalities, legal definitions, but it wasn't until he got near the final section that the air in the room tightened, dense and electric. "Here," he said, lifting a page with Helen's unmistakably neat handwriting, "is the statement regarding the full inheritance." My father smoothed his tie, my mother straightened her posture, Ethan grinned, and then everything stopped. "The entire estate, valued at $18 million, Mr. Dalton read calmly, is to be transferred solely to my granddaughter Avery Collins." Silence. Real, suffocating silence. My father lurched forward. "I'm sorry, what?" My mother's hand flew to her chest. "There must be a mistake." Ethan's mouth dropped open. He shook his head violently. No, 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 that's wrong. Grandma said the legacy was mine. Avery doesn't even care about any of this." I met his eyes for the first time. "She didn't leave it to the person who cared about the money," I said quietly. "She left it to the person who cared about her." Ethan's face flushed with rage. My father slammed a palm against the table. "She promised us. She told us we would make the decisions. There's no way she meant this." Mr. Dalton didn't flinch. "Actually, Mr. Collins, there's more." He pressed a button on a small remote, and a screen on the far wall blinked to life. My mother gasped softly. Ethan swore under his breath, and I felt my heartbeat jump into my throat. There she was, Helen, frail but steady, soft-spoken but powerful, eyes clear with the kind of truth that does not require explanation. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means the choice is no longer mine to defend. So I will simply speak the truth." My mother's face blanched. My father stiffened. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, shaking his head in denial. "I watched you," Helen continued, "all of you, and only one person at this table has ever carried responsibility with humility, integrity, and strength." Her eyes shifted straight through the screen, straight into the room. "To my granddaughter, Avery." Something in me cracked. Not a wound, not a break, a release. "I leave my entire estate to her," Helen said, "because she has earned what the rest of you believed you were entitled to." The video ended. The room froze. My father looked at me with a fury that felt brittle. My mother looked at me with disbelief that bordered on horror. Ethan looked at me as if something precious had been stolen from him, but nothing had been stolen. It had finally been returned to its rightful owner. I sat back, inhaled slowly, and felt something settle inside me, not triumph, not revenge, but truth. And truth, when finally spoken aloud, is louder than any fire they could have lit. The next chapter would hurt them more than they understood, because inheritance wasn't just money, it was accountability, and they had avoided that their entire lives. If this were your family, do you think they would have apologized or doubled down? Tell me your honest take. This part always sparks debate. The moment Helen's video ended, the silence in the room felt almost physical, thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like a second layer of air. For a few long seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. It was as if her voice still hung in the space between us, refusing to evaporate. And then, everything broke. My father was the first to react. He shot out of his chair so fast it scraped across the floor, the noise sharp enough to echo through the hallway. "This is absurd," he snapped at Mr. Dalton. "Helen wouldn't do this. She trusted me. I handled her finances for years." Mr. Dalton didn't blink. "Yes," he said calmly, "and she left very clear instructions because of that." Maybe it should have been reassuring, but instead, something tightened in my father's jaw. The muscles near his temple twitched the same twitch I'd seen every time life didn't bend the way he demanded. My mother, meanwhile, looked like she was trying not to faint. She clutched her purse like it was a life raft. "Avery," she whispered, "be reasonable. Your grandmother loved the whole family. She wouldn't want us fighting." I met her eyes. They were glossy, desperate, pleading for the version of me she could manipulate. But that girl was gone. Before I could respond, Ethan leaned forward, palms flat on the table, looking between me and the documents as if waiting for someone to shout, "Surprise! She can't handle this. She doesn't even know the first thing about running a legacy. Grandma meant for me to take over. I already put deposits down. I have plans." Plans, that was the part that almost made me laugh. Plans built on money he never earned. Plans built on a future that was never his. Plans built on entitlement that had finally met a wall. "I'm not giving up the estate," I said quietly. The room stiffened. My father's nostrils flared, my mother's mouth fell open. Ethan let out a short, breathy sound that wasn't quite a laugh, it was more like disbelief crashing into panic. "You don't deserve it," he spat. I tilted my head. "Maybe, but I didn't set anything on fire during dinner." End quote, end quote, end quote, end quote, end quote. Even Mr. Dalton coughed into his hand to hide a smile. That's the thing no one tells you about family falling apart. Sometimes it's tragic, sometimes it's painful, and sometimes it's so absurd you have to remind yourself this isn't a sitcom. But moments like this, moments where entitlement hits a brick wall called accountability, they are a special kind of clarity. My father stepped toward me now, voice low and threatening. "You will ruin everything. $18 million is too much responsibility for someone as inexperienced as you. Your brother failed out of 2 programs?" I asked gently. "Crashed 3 cars? Spent his savings on crypto stickers?" Mr. Dalton coughed again. Ethan went bright red. "You're twisting things." "No," I said. "For once I'm just saying them out loud." My mother finally snapped, her polite facade cracking down the middle. "We raised you. You owe us. Everything you have is because of us. And to scribe," I held her gaze, "everything I am is because of Helen." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for telling the truth. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't folding into the shape they expected of me. I was standing in the shape Helen had helped me grow into. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat gently. "If there are no further disputes, we will proceed with notarizing Avery's ownership." My father lunged forward. "This isn't over. It's not of A. But the problem was, it was. For them, not for me. Because while they were busy trying to take something from me, I was finally learning how to take something back. My life. My voice. My place in the world. I signed the papers with steady hands, not shaking, not trembling, not even considering how surreal it felt. When the pen left the page, something inside me settled. Not triumph, not revenge, just truth. The truth that I was no longer the invisible daughter. The truth that their opinion no longer defined me. The truth that the moment they burned my diploma, they didn't destroy my future, they exposed their own. My father stormed out first, muttering about legal action that didn't exist. My mother hurried after him, already trying to salvage the illusion of a united family. Ethan lingered in the doorway, eyes wide with a kind of hollow fear I'd never seen in him. "You're really taking everything?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, standing. "I'm taking back what was already mine." He didn't respond. He just watched me, maybe realizing for the first time that I wasn't the background character in his story. As he disappeared down the hall, I looked at the empty chairs they left behind. For years, I tried to earn a seat at that table. Turns out, I didn't need one. I was always meant for a different room entirely. A room where the truth mattered, where silence wasn't demanded, where my grandmother's voice still echoed, guiding me long after she left. And deep down, I knew, Everything that happened today was only the beginning. Because inheriting the estate wasn't the real shift. Becoming someone they could no longer control, that was the real inheritance. If you think this family meltdown was wild, wait until you hear what happened after I took over the estate. And tell me this, who do you think handled this worse? The dad, the mom, or Ethan? Comment your vote. I need to know. When I stepped out of the lawyer's office that day, the California sun felt different on my skin. I had walked into that building carrying years of insecurity, silence, and the quiet ache of never being chosen. I walked out with something entirely new, not the $18 million, not the business, not the properties or the accounts, but a life that finally belonged to me. The door shut behind me with a soft click. I took a deep breath and felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tightened for so long it almost felt permanent. My father's anger, my mother's disbelief, Ethan's entitlement, all of it stayed in that room. None of it followed me out the door. For the first time in years, I felt light. The next few months were a kind of rebirth, though a quiet one. I didn't move into a mansion or buy anything extravagant. I chose a modest apartment on the southern edge of San Jose, just enough space for a desk, a bed, and my grandmother's old lamp that I repaired when I was 12. The lamp flickered gently each night, casting shadows that felt like stories she left behind for me to continue. I spent my early mornings walking to work, breathing in the crisp air, realizing how strange it felt to enter a place where people looked at me with respect rather than expectation. You learn to recognize the difference quickly. Respect feels grounding. Expectation feels like a net tightening around your ribs. At the company my grandmother left behind, I stepped into a leadership role, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to rebuild the things she created with intention. The employees were cautious at first, unsure of who I was. A Collins, yes, but not the Collins they knew. I didn't bark orders. I didn't demand loyalty. I didn't walk in pretending to know everything. I listened. I observed. I made decisions the way Helen taught me, slowly, thoughtfully, with both logic and empathy. And something amazing happened. People started to trust me. They came into my office with problems they hadn't been able to voice before. I changed outdated systems, removed toxic managers, and reinvested in programs Helen believed in, but had been pushed aside. Little by little, the company began to breathe again. Sometimes I'd pause in the hallway, imagining Helen walking beside me, nodding quietly the same way she did when I soldered my first crooked wire. "You see more than they think," she once told me. "You always have." She was right. As for my family, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no apologies. Silence, but not the kind they forced on me all my life. This silence was mine, chosen, peaceful. But peace doesn't erase memory. It clarifies it. At night, I'd stand on my balcony overlooking the city lights. I would think about the girl I used to be, the girl who measured herself against the moods of her parents, who whispered instead of speaking, who worked twice as hard for half the acknowledgement. She deserved so much more than what she was given. And maybe that's why this new life felt so profound. Because I didn't gain power, I gained perspective. I didn't inherit money, I inherited freedom. I didn't win a fight, I simply stopped fighting for a place I was never meant to stand in. One evening, months after the will reading, I found myself sorting through an old box of Helen's belongings. Nestled inside was a folded piece of paper with my name on it. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened it gently. Avery, strength isn't loud. Strength is steady. Strength is choosing yourself, even when others don't. I hope that when you read this, you finally stopped shrinking. With love, Grandma. I read the note twice, maybe 3 times, until my eyes blurred. The timing was uncanny, like she somehow knew exactly when I'd need the reminder. I placed the note inside my logbook, the one she gave me years ago, the one where I used to track every small, slight, and disappointment. Now it held something better. Proof that she believed in me long before I believed in myself. And here's the unexpected thing. I don't hate my family. I don't wish them pain. I don't replay their cruelty with bitterness. I replay it with clarity. Because without them, I might never have learned how strong I could be without their approval tethered to my every step. The fire that burned my diploma didn't end my story. It lit the beginning of the one that finally made sense. I don't know where they are now, what my father is yelling about, what my mother is pretending isn't happening, what Ethan is telling people about how he almost inherited a fortune. Maybe one day they'll reach out. Maybe they won't. But either way, it won't change who I've become. It won't change that I climbed out of the shadows they placed me in. It won't change that I built a life with my own hands. It won't change that Helen was right. I always saw more than they thought. And I'll keep seeing more. Because this isn't the end of my story. It's the foundation of everything that comes next. If you want to hear what I did with the company, and the one unexpected person who came back into my life because of it, make sure you subscribe. Trust me, the next chapter is the one people argue about the most.